Hello, everybody. Today we are moving on to the second section of content. Before this, we were looking at ideas and ideas' relationship to reality, in particular in the realm of politics. And the example that we were looking at was Brexit. We spent some time looking at Brexit, the problems of it, and its relation to the history of the British Empire. And that was, in particular, something that we looked at last week. Today, we're moving, as I said, we're moving to the second section, which is, for me, a quite interesting section. It will be looking at art. We will be looking at more classical Renaissance art as well as more modern art. We will be trying to describe the content, or you can see here on the right hand side here a set of kind of vocabulary. So we'll be looking at form, the form. So is it a painting? What shapes are in the painting? What figures are in the painting? We'll be looking at also the content. So what is the painting depicting? What is it representing? What colours are being used? And in what manner are those being used? The relationship between form and content, I think, is one of the oldest and most important questions in analysing art. I think it is important because the difference between form and content is flou, is blurs. For example, to what extent could we say that a figure of a person in a painting is the content, but also supplies a form, or it supplies a shape? In English, we have a distinction between form and shape. So la forme. In French, la forme is one word for what we have between shape and form. The form can also mean, as I was saying, the form which the painting takes. So is it, the form which a piece of art takes. So a painting, a sculpture, or now video art, or even a 3D modeling, so digital art, so les créations numériques, or les modèles 3D. So we'll be thinking about this relationship between form and content, and the way that it expresses. And here we can talk about the ideas, or what I like to call the ideational content. So the content which is not just of the subjects or the figures or the shapes, but the ideas that are also in the artwork. Just another bit of vocabulary as well for today. So we have brush strokes. So that's what we do with the pinceau. It's what we do with the paint brush. We make marks. We make strokes with the paintbrush. Other words as well. We have types, if you will, or we have expression. The problem of does the artwork express the ideas of, or how does it express the ideas in the painting? So expression is related also to form and content. We have, and here between these two, we could say expressionism as well, and realism. So expressionism would be maybe more related to intuition. So the painter who makes marks or brushstrokes on the paper or on the canvas, the toile, the canvas, expressively. So without necessarily trying to figure someone or trying to produce a shape that is pre-thought. So we could ask about the relationship between ideas here and expression. So do ideas come first and then we have expression, or does expression come first and then we move to ideas? Another interesting notion related to all of these as well is symbolism, or the symbolic. So are there things in the paintings that are symbolic, or are they figurative? Let me write this here as well. Here, figurative. So figurative things are things or in the painting or in a piece of art that represent things with kind of certain sense of realism. So when I paint a dog, it kind of looks like a dog and it means a dog. So symbolic would be, if I painted a dog, does it mean a dog, or does it mean something like a servant or a servitude or friendship even? So here we have a relationship to these. And figurative again would mean, just to double check, just to say it's kind of would be something realist. Yeah, so that's the some of the things I want us to think about when we look at art. So form, content, ideational content, brushstrokes, or you could say the manner in which things are painted or art is created. Expressions, so the way things are expressed, expressionism. Realism, is it real representation, or is it a figurative? Is it a real or figurative representation, or a symbolic representation? And then we have intuition as a kind of relationship of the artist and the expression. Where does this intuition? We could say here maybe also inspiration. Okay, to warm up as well, I would like us to have a look at a video by an interview of Francis Bacon. So a very important painter, British painter of the modern period. And I would like us to look at kind of the way that he's describing some of his paintings here before we have a look at this set of images as well. As we can see here, down here on the bottom left, is Francis Bacon in his studio, and a painting here also of Francis Bacon. But first of all, let's have a look at this video with him talking.
A sunset, but I've never succeeded in doing it. But I was also very influenced by the Eisenstein film, The Potemkin, and the Odessa sequence, in which is this wonderful shot of the nurse screaming. And also, when I first went to Paris, I found in an old bookshop a book on diseases of the mouth, which was beautifully coloured, hand-coloured. The plates were hand-coloured, and that it had a tremendous effect on me. And I don't know if this obsession when I was much younger with the mouth has a lot of sexual implications, as people say it may have, and I believe psychologically it is supposed to. But anyhow, whatever it was, I was at that time very obsessed by that image.
So you might well have been interested in painting open mouths and teeth, even if you hadn't been painting the screen.
I think I might.
Nevertheless, you did become involved with painting the human screen.
I did, and I've always wanted and never succeeded in also painting the smile, but I have never been able to do it.
Actually, in your work as a whole, there are relatively few paintings that have ostensible subjects which might be called horrific, and most of them are fairly straight subjects of figures seated in rooms and so on, and yet people have a sense that your work as a whole is horrific. Why do you think this might be?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, you may say the carcasses of meat. It's true that when you go into a butcher's shop, you see the beauty of the meat, how beautiful meat can be. But when you think about it, also, you can think of the whole horror of life, of one thing living off another, and the natural pattern of life, and the natural sequence of life. I mean, it's why when all these stupid things about bullfighting, because if you go, people will eat meat and then complain about bullfighting. thing is so mad. They will go in and complain about bullfighting covered with furs and birds in their hair. I mean, it's so illogical.
But yet people's sense of your work as being horrific is not really justified by the ostensible subject matter. Why do you think they have this feeling that it is?
Well, the thing is, I've always hoped to put over things as directly and rawly as I possibly can. And perhaps if a thing comes across directly, they feel that that is horrific.
Yes,
because if you say something, even if you say something very directly to somebody about something, they are sometimes offended, although it is a fact.
Mm-hmm.
Because people tend to be offended by facts, or what used to be called truth.
Let us say that you have a model, somebody you have already painted many times from memory.
Yes.
Have you ever had such a person sitting for you?
Yes.
And what has happened?
They inhibit me. They inhibit me because one of the things is I would, if I like them, I don't want to practice the injury that I do to them in my work before them. If I like them, I would rather practice the injury in private, by which I think I can record the fact of them more clearly.
In what sense do you conceive it as an injury?
Well, because people nearly always believe that the distortions of them are an injury to them, no matter how much they feel for or how much they like you. They do nevertheless, as most of them are not people who are concerned with art, feel the distortions are forms of injury.
Don't you think their instinct is probably right?
Possibly.
Do you not think that when you talk about recording different levels, among other things you may be doing, is precisely expressing at one and the same time a love of the person being painted and a hostility towards them, and that the marks you are making are both a caress and a blow, an assault?
I think that this thing is how I think it goes to a deeper thing than this. I think is how do I feel, and this can only be feeling. How can I make this image more immediately real to myself? That's all.
Would you not be making it more immediately real by summing up at one and the same time contradictory feelings towards what you're painting? That would be making it very real, I would have thought.
Well, I think that then you would be going into psychological ways of seeing. I don't think, but most painters do. I think most painters are actually, at any rate today, are attempting to bring over the image that they want to record as strongly and as immediately as possible onto the nervous system, and it is not actually as involved, although it may be subconsciously involved with what you say, but I don't think it's consciously involved at all.
If it was consciously involved, the result would be disastrous. But don't you think, and this is why I say that your sitter instinctively sees this as an injury, which in a sense might be thought naive, but I'm suggesting that the sitter's instinct is right.
It may be
in
right.
realizing what's really going on. What
you're really saying is that what Wilde said, you kill the thing you love.
In the paintings of...
Okay, I thought that's enough for us watching there. As you can see in this video, Francis Bacon is talking about many of the things actually that we have written about here. The expression, what is real as well for him, is something that is depicted as accurately as possible real, or is something that is to reach the real, is there something else that needs to happen? He also talks, which is quite interesting, about injury, the kind of also the relationship between the way that the marks of his brush give an impression of the person that is maybe more real than a kind of an accurate depiction. There we go. So I thought that would be very useful for us to have a little look at. You can obviously listen to it a number of times. He does go on, but I think that I will leave it for the moment. Okay, so let's move on to this this exercise here. So here we can see that there are 4 pictures. One is a photograph. Here again of Francis Bacon in his studio, taken in 1974. And next to also one of the famous paintings that he makes called 3 Studies for the Figures at the Base of a Crucifixion. So we have the notion of figure here. And we hear what's called a triptych. A triptych, it's a triple 3 paintings next to each other that are supposed to depict a kind of a movement in time. So if we move up here, then we have another triptych, this time a classical triptych from Peter Paul Rubens, painted in the 17th century. Paul Rubens being one of the famous, I think, Dutch artists, certainly of the north. I think he's Dutch. Here doing a triptych of Christ. So here we see the subject matters both being here and here similar but in different styles. And then on the left, again, maybe similarly or different from Francis Bacon, there is a painting by an anonymous pupil of Rembrandt. Rembrandt being, again, a very famous Dutch painter who is very famous for his use of light. And here we can see in, again, the 17th century, a painting of a painter in his studio. Okay, so what I would like you to do here is to pick one set of documents and to describe them. So you may pick either these 2, or these 2. You may pick any ones, actually, any 2, and describe them. But I think the ones that work together are maybe these ones and these ones. So the left set, the right set. Or you could, you could talk about the other ones as well. But I think those work together. So then just do a kind of description of them. Maybe using some of these terms as well. And once you've done that, I'd like you to try and compare your set of documents using the following table. Or if you wish, you may want to fill this in and then try and describe. So the common points, so what is there that is similar, and then the differences, so what are there that are different, and then the last one, what ideas are conveyed in these documents, and so are they similar. So this is maybe more talking about the content and the form, and this is talking about the ideas. So what ideas are there being represented? Are there religious ideas? Are there ideas about the human body? And these sort of things. And these ones obviously maybe are the ideas about what it means to be a painter. Okay, so I'm going to leave you to try and do that, and I will stop the video at this point. Hello, so I hope that you managed to look through and describe the different sets of paintings. Maybe I will actually talk about them quickly because I think it's quite interesting. So we can see that if you chose this set, there is a kind of a quite big difference in a certain sense. One of the biggest difference is that Francis Bacon is very much surrounded by, we could say, mess. There are many pictures everywhere, many paintbrushes everywhere, and lots of paper on the floor. We could say that this gives a very kind of this image of the painter as someone that is expressive, someone that is maybe we could say to a certain extent slightly freer and less constrained than the top picture here of Rembrandt, looking very formal almost. Things quite tidy. Things look in a way more professional. They look neater, and there's a certain pride maybe, or a different sense of pride from the bottom in Francis Bacon, where he's almost showing off his capacity to paint in Rembrandt, his expertise in painting. There's also a person in the back there in the shadows who it's quite hard to tell who he is. And I'm not too sure what the relationship to that is there. But yeah, we've also got kind of on the bottom right hand corner props also for his paintings. In the bottom again, Francis Bacon being sat down, a kind of in amongst the art, almost that he's kind of, I wouldn't say not professional, but kind of living the art as a way of life, more than a kind of, it's more informal than the top one. Okay, so moving on to the next set, we can see here that they are both maybe using, maybe the other thing, sorry, just to quickly say, one, here we have a painting of a painter. So it's just for photography. So again, it's more formalized. It's using composition much more, whereas the bottom one is a photograph. So it gives a kind of, and that probably gives its notion of the informality, because it's supposed to be a real depiction of Francis Bacon. So the idea actually there, you can see a tension, because the top one is supposed to be realistic, but it's formally a painting, so it's a representation. Second one, and Rembrandt obviously painting quite realistic, figurative paintings, whereas the second one of Bacon, it's a photograph, and photograph is supposed to give a more realistic understanding of, or more truthful, if you will, real depiction of Bacon, who does paintings which are maybe more expressive. So there you see a difference in the ideas. Moving to the paintings and the pictures themselves, we can see that the ideas maybe are similar. The first one is representing the timeline of Christ. So we have the visitation, Christ descending from the cross, and then the presentation of Jesus at the end. So what we call the Passion of Christ, the timeline, the chronology of Christ dying. And I think Christ is also very much present, and Jesus is very important for this depiction. In Bacon's, however, we have obviously a much more horrific, less realistic, more expressive triptych again of the three studies of figures at the base of the crucifixion. So we're not too sure who these are. Are they similar people to those in the middle painting of the Rubens? Are they people that brought Christ down? And they're certainly not being depicted realistically, but maybe a kind of deformed and almost monsters. And as we heard in the video that we looked at, we can see here Bacon's concentration on mouths and the scream of people. So maybe there is much more to say here as well. There's lots of red in it. The forms are almost animal-like, without eyes as well. So kind of almost being screaming and almost being blinded by the the horrific scene of Christ dying, and very much being portraits almost of them. And here we have this notion of the study, so 3 studies of, so kind of repetition of a study of something, which is something that the Bacon did. Okay, hopefully you can feel that out. I've just given you some indications. What we will move on to now is written comprehension, as we usually do each week. And I will look at I will read this out for you. So this is written by Louis Netter, also an artist, not so well known obviously as Francis Bacon, and he's writing in the Conversation, which is an American online magazine. He's writing this during the time of coronavirus. So here, I thought this was interesting because it talked a lot about the difference between inward and outward. Does the painter or the artist depict or express things which are inward, or does he just copy things that are outward to him? So the problem of the unconscious, or the unconscious desires, or even the unconscious desires not just of the individual but of the collective of society. So I will read this out to you now slowly. People are dying. Critical resources are stretched. The very essence of our freedom is shrinking. And yet we are moved inward, to the vast inner space of our thoughts and imagination, a place we have perhaps neglected. Of all the necessities we now feel so keenly aware of, the arts and their contribution to our well-being is evident and, in some ways, central to coronavirus confinement for those of us locked in a home. For some, there are more pressing needs, but momentary joys, even in dire circumstances, often come through the arts and collective expression. As a lecturer in illustration, I am constantly encouraging students to find an artistic voice and identify, in this crowded world of images, some touchstones to develop their own aesthetic. Art critic and theorist John Berger identified, in The Art of Drawing, something that is inherently autobiographical, a continual process of refining vision which moves us towards new understandings about ourselves and the world around us. In this time of crisis and isolation, the role of art becomes more central to our lives, whether we realize it or not. We can easily take for granted the grand buffet of media that is available to us, and can be guilty of a lack of patience when students find it difficult to discern in quality amid a sea of memes and amateur artistic indulgence, which, to the unsuspecting, can appear to be worthy. The lack of curation on the internet frustrates people like me who value culture and its contribution, and equally are quickly becoming grumpy old men and women. Whether we like it or not, our consumption habits, including media, form who we are. Our values, our inclinations, they are a patchwork of beliefs that are also tested in these difficult times. Art can set you free. I was a high school teacher in Sleepy Hollow, New York, 20 miles away from Ground Zero, when the 9/11 attacks happened. It was a time like now that tested our collective ability to make sense of a new normal and to mourn for the time before that would never come back. A schism in the collective consciousness. So here we can see this notion of the kind of collective consciousness, not just the individual, that everyone struggled to frame, even artists. Art Spiegelman's graphic novel, In the Shadow of No Towers, was less of a coherent narrative about 9/11 than an attempt to resemble his own psyche through the comfort of his own creations in the medium of the comic itself. So here again we can see here the notion of his own psyche, so the difference between kind of a collective understanding of something and an individual understanding. People on social media are sharing favourite Netflix playlists, songs and even artwork to reach out beyond isolation and share what they love. It is naive to think that such lists are mere casual swaps of entertainment enjoyed and recommended. They are an externalization of the personality of the list maker. The romance enthusiast, the lover of comedies, the thrill seeker, the horror fan, and the aficionado of obscure documentaries. In this time of restriction, TV, film, books, and video games offer us a chance to be mobile, to move around freely in a fictional world in a way that is now impossible in reality. Art connects us to the foreign, the exotic, and the impossible. But in our current context, it also connects us to a world where anything is possible, a world out of our grasp for now. The world we wake up in is a counterfeit reality. Things look the same. Unlike those now familiar films, the descent of humanity is not apparent in the slow shuffle of moaning, glassy-eyed zombies. The threat we face feels like those clever horror films like The Blair Witch Project, Paranormal Activity, and more recent films like A Quiet Place, where we rarely see the source of horror. The current moment is best understood as a kind of low hum of anxiety, like the buzzing of a pylon in a film. What that was, what that is. In my travels to Kenya in 2019, and more specifically Nairobi, I drew regularly. Drew as in dessiner. I was working on the Tupamu research project, measuring the lung capacity of 2,600 children aged between 5 and 18 from 2 areas in Nairobi: the informal settlement, Mukuru, and the adjacent affluent area, Buruburu. The research team was collaborating with local artists, teachers, and community members to develop participatory, creative methods to engage with the 2 communities in the study. The drawings capture my impressions of the vibrant streets of Nairobi, and specifically of Mukuru, a large informal settlement in a visceral flood. It is a visceral flood to the senses. During an event in which we moved through Mukuru in procession, testing our creative methods for sensitization, which included puppetry, art making, including graffiti, songs and dance, a colleague, surveying the crowds of children and people in the narrow, dusty road, said, "I wouldn't want to see what a virus would do in this population." We are now seeing this unfold, and I worry for all those people living in such close proximity. Self-isolation and the sharing of Netflix lists is an absurd luxury to the people here who are being confined in small steel shacks. Life was hard before COVID-19. After, it could be unbearable. A life in isolation is nothing new. Communities like this have been isolated and invisible to the vast majority of the world for a long time. It is capitalism's dustbin. When capitalism coughs, these communities perish. So what of the arts in isolation? Might be too early to write that book and paint that picture that captures the buzz of anxiety we feel. We probably need more time, and artists need more sunrises and sunsets to rise and fall on the full, nervous houses. They need more time to listen to the sounds of life interrupted and to mourn for the world that was, watching it as it dragged further into the shadows. Okay, I'm going to pause the video now so that you can read and maybe listen again before we go into the questions. Thank you. To the vast inner space of our thoughts and imagination, a place we have perhaps neglected. In what context, this is the question, in what context was this article written? What does the author mean by "we moved inward"? So I'd like to think about the context and what does the author mean by "we moved inward." Number 2. So read the whole article and then I'd like you to fill in these 2 boxes. So according to Luminetta, art allows certain things and it prevents others. So what does it allow? What does it prevent? Number 3. What is the author's opinion on the media's relationship with the arts? Number 4. Read from 1.39 to 1.44. Explain the comparison. So there's a comparison that's made. I'd like you to explain that comparison made by the author. Number 5. How did the author's experience in Kenya, so he was in Nairobi and other places, influence his vision of art of crises? Okay, so those are the questions in relation to the article that I read out. I will actually move straight on to the next exercise, but if you could now stop and try and fill those out, that would be great. Okay, so moving on to number B of this part, I'd like you to use your own words and reformulate the following excerpt. So you should be able to identify and expose those ideas put forward by the author. So this is the excerpt, and I'd like you to reformulate. So reformulate, change it into your own words. It might be too early to write that book and paint that picture that captures the buzz of anxiety we all feel. We probably need more time, and artists need more sunrises and sunsets to rise and fall on the full, nervous houses. They need more time to listen to the sounds of life interrupted and to mourn for the world that was, watching it drift further into the shadows. So, as you can see, it's very, very poetic. Maybe if you could try and reformulate it to make it a bit more factual or a bit more really simple would be a good word to describe. Okay. Number 3. So this is now moving into the grammar part. In these sentences, a particular kind of type of grammar, in particular voice. So I want you to look out, I'll say actually, I want you to look out for the passive. So we're looking today also at the passive and active and how to turn those around into one or the other. So if I just read this out, maybe you could try and underline in this where the passive is. So, and yet we are moved inward to the vast inner space of our thoughts and imagination. The current the current moment is best understood as a kind of low hum of anxiety. To mourn for the world that was, watching as it is dragged further into the shadows. Self-isolation and the sharing of Netflix lists is an absurd luxury to the people who are being confined in small steel shacks. Okay, so try and find the passive in there. And so this is a similar exercise, but here I would like you to réécrivez les phrases qui suivent en utilisant le mot souligné comme sujet. Du coup, il faut décider si l'agent doit être mentionné ou non. Du coup, là, il faut reformuler les phrases oui, en utilisant le mot souligné comme sujet. Du coup, si c'est actif ou passif, il faut voir comment c'est utilisé dans la phrase et reformuler. Alors, A, c'est they taught me that such behavior is rude. So, I'll do the first one for you. So, they taught me that such behavior is rude. I was taught that such behavior is rude. So, I was taught, or I was taught by them. So, they taught me, I was taught by them that such behavior is rude. All right, so. Here, oh, sorry, I'm going to get rid of this. Let me just show you how that functions. So here we have they as the subject. So they taught me. So that is an active sentence of they, ils Ils m'ont appris que. Ils m'ont appris que. So, they taught me that. That such behavior is rude. So, they taught me that such behavior is rude. So, if me needs to become the subject, me becomes I. So, I was taught by them that such behavior was rude. Here you can see it becomes passive because moi j'étais, so I was, moi j'étais or j'ai été, okay? And then that always follows by a past participle. So I was taught par eux, by them, okay? So let's look at this here. They offered George the new job and he accepted it. So the new job becomes the subject here. Susie lent me the money I needed. So similar to this one. Me becoming the subject, so I. Everyone calls him a liar. So him becoming the subject. When I came back to the hotel, they were serving lunch. So lunch becoming the subject. I think you should throw away those old trousers. So these becoming the subject. I'd like to say that between French and English, the alteration of the passive and the active is very similar. So, it's when you see a passive in French, it becomes a passive in English with the same construction. So, so here we can see, let me just do this other one for you with you. So they offered the new job. So they offered George, the new job and he accepted it. So the new job, if that's to become the subject, so it's the new job was offered to George by them. So they offered George. Ils ont offert George un nouveau poste, un nouveau job, et il a pris. Il a accepté. Ils ont offert George. They offered George. Ils ont offert George. They offered George. So here we can see this would be just the same in French. Le nouveau job était offert. So était offert. It follows the same construction, remembering that was always translates either as été or a été, and then to George by them. So this is par eux, so by them in French. So I'll let you do the rest of them, but thinking that if in French we use été offert, or if we use that, that's the passive. So it's the something was offered by someone. It's the by someone, offered by someone, that makes it the passive. Okay, so here I'd like you to do this similar thing, but traduisez en utilisant un passif. So, ils ont été attaqués dans la rue. So, ils ont été attaqués. So, chaque fois qu'on voit le ont été suivi, le été ou est suivi par un passé composé, on voit que c'est un... ah non, pardon, ça c'est pas... si, on voit que c'est un passif, pardon. Parce qu'ils ont été attaqués. Pas ils ont attaqué quelqu'un. Ils étaient attaqués. Donc aussi, ils sont l'objet même de l'attaque. Ils sont l'objet même de l'attaque. Du coup, par exemple, c'est comme si on disait ils ont été attaqués dans la rue par quelqu'un. par quelqu'un. Ok, ils ont été attaqués dans la route par quelqu'un. C'était pas eux qui ont attaqué quelqu'un. Sinon, ça aurait été actif. Genre, ils ont attaqué quelqu'un, ça aurait été actif ou euh, ouais. Ok. Euh, B. Je te téléphone pendant qu'on répare ma voiture. Le notaire leur a montré le contrat. La tarte aux pommes peut se servir avec de la glace. Sa demande vient d'être refusée. Okay, so I'd like you to try and translate these. Maybe these ones being a bit more difficult, but I'd like you to try and translate them into English. Okay, and then there's the written expression. If you'd like to give it a go, I will ask you actually for next week's one to be handed in, but this one I'd like you to try if you'd like. Je suis en train, je vais pas aller en français, je suis en train de corriger les expressions décrites. C'est juste que il y en avait pas mal, il y a plus que 50, alors je fais par jour quelques-unes et je vais les rendre tout en même temps. Ok, merci. Donc je vais lire ça en fait aussi parce que c'est peut-être bien. In your opinion, could art help build a new world to replace the world that was, which, according to Linette, is drifting further into the shadows? Alors ça, je vais mettre en ligne aujourd'hui. C'est lundi, j'ai commencé hier la vidéo, là j'ai fini ce matin. Et les corrections, comme chaque semaine, seront mises en ligne à la fin de la semaine. Donc là maintenant, il y a des corrections pour la semaine 4 en ligne. Et aussi, je serai sur Zoom ce soir aussi, au cas où il y a des questions entre 14h30 et 19h. Ok, merci beaucoup. Et encore une fois, oui, si vous avez des questions ou des soucis, n'hésitez pas à m'envoyer un mail. Merci beaucoup.